Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2007 fantasy adventure Stardust. And the film begins with a prologue segment which establishes the existence of a fairy tale realm known as Stormhold. Stormhold lies just outside the small English village of Wall. And a local man from Wall manages to sneak into Stormhold, where he has a brief romantic dalliance with a princess. Wouldn't you know it, 9 months later, a baby turns up on his doorstep. 18 years after that, the movie itself, the movie proper, finally begins, and the baby has grown up into a young man named Tristan. Tristan's desperately in love, or at least lust, with local beauty Victoria, and in order to win her hand in marriage, he promises to retrieve a falling star for her, which of course means venturing into Stormhold as his father did before him. The quest to retrieve the star will not be an easy one, of course. There's a succession crisis in Stormhold, a deadly tussle of fratricidal princes, between whom Tristan is about to find himself caught. Tristan's also not the only one looking for the star. It's also being sought by three ancient witches, who are determined to eat its heart and replenish their lost youth. Oh, and there's also the teeny tiny complication that in falling into Stormhold, the star has become personified as a beautiful young woman named Yvain. She's obviously not too keen on having her heart eaten, but she's also not especially fond of the idea of being carted off to the mundane world as Tristan's wedding present. Shenanigans, it may be said, ensue. Stardust enjoyed a positive critical and popular reception, though with worldwide ticket sales of only roughly double its production budget, was probably not the blockbuster that its producers had hoped for. And I do think they probably had high hopes. Fantasy had been doing big business at the box office, what with the runaway success of both the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter film franchises. And this film was based on a well-received novel authored by fantasy wonderkind Neil Gaiman, who was one of the most highly regarded modern-day writers within the genre. And with a more than $70 million budget, they certainly weren't stinting on the film's finances. Some of that financing was necessary for the special effects, of course, but I suspect a considerable chunk was reserved for the most obvious clue that the producers hoped for big things for this film, which is the cast. Stardust features a ridiculous array of on-screen talent. It has significant roles for Claire Danes, Charlie Cox, Sienna Miller, Ricky Gervais, Jason Fleming, Rupert Everett, Peter O'Toole, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Robert De Niro, plus narration by Ian McKellen. That's not the kind of cast you assemble for anything less than a tentpole project. And many members of the ensemble certainly seem to be having a good time. Michelle Pfeiffer is great fun as the gleefully wicked witch Lamia, for instance. Quite a highlight of the movie, while De Niro camps it up as the piratical and flamboyant, in more ways than one, Captain Shakespeare. The film also boasts a minor appearance by a pre-fame Henry Cavill, as well as secondary roles for a host of familiar British faces such as comedian David Walliams and actors Dexter Fletcher, Kate McGowan and Mark Strong, among others. Except for Cavill, this latter group may not be quite such high-profile names, but they're all capable actors with a strong body of work behind them. You're almost certain to have seen them in something else, and they all do good work here. So we've got talented people giving strong performances in a generously funded movie based on a well-regarded novel. Sounds like a slam dunk, right? So why was it only a modest success? Well, ultimately, I think the film's script has two significant problems, the first of which is its pacing. This issue is clear right from the outset of the movie, with the prologue involving Tristan's father meandering on for far, far longer than it actually needed to, delaying the beginning of the real story in the process. This delay is completely unnecessary as well. A line or two of dialogue would have been plenty to establish that Tristan's mother Una was from Stormhold. That's all we really needed to know at the beginning of the movie. And when Una turns up later in the movie, that would have been an opportunity to quickly fill in the critical missing details. This overly long preamble also contributes to the overall sense of the film being just a bit too long. The remainder of the 2-hour runtime is packed with a lot of stuff, frankly more than it needs, and little of it is given real time to breathe or be anything other than spectacle. And it's all quite often fun spectacle, I have to admit. There's a sword fight in the climactic sequence that has some great physical comedy in it, for instance. But it all just feels a bit overlong by the time we finally reach the big finale. During the run-up to said finale, the film's generally at its best when it goes for humour rather than drama. And the reason for that is the film's second problem. Tristan is a complete jerk. Look, I get that the film is trying to show him growing from a selfish and self-centered boy into a heroic and kind-hearted noble man, but I simply didn't find that evolution at all convincing. Tristan is simply too callous and hard-hearted toward Yvain in the early phase of the film, and their inevitable romance, because of course they fall in love, rang false to me. Yes, Tristan does save Yvain from Lamia's first attempt to kill her, but he does need her to keep her alive for his own stated goal of giving her as a gift to his intended fiancée. So it's not like it's a wholly altruistic move on his part. And look, I get it. Tristan and Yvain are both very attractive young people in emotionally stressful circumstances, and that is exactly the kind of scenario that almost invariably leads to sexy times in books and movies. But it really helps if the writing does more to show an emotional connection between the characters, and it helps even more if they manage to make both of them at least somewhat likeable. Tristan falls well short of that mark for the vast majority of this film. Ultimately, Stardust has a great cast and numerous fun scenes dotted throughout it, but for my taste, it doesn't quite manage to assemble these components into a convincing whole, and is ultimately less than the sum of its parts. Next time, the 1962 offering Carnival of Crime, which squanders a potentially interesting premise, but does at least have the distinction of managing to be terrible in some distinctive and genuinely baffling ways. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.